and welcome to officially the most packed lunch and learn I've ever organized. I'm Angela Willits. I'm a clinical mental health faculty here in the school. I'm director of our part-time MSW program, and I'm super excited to introduce our speaker, our presenter for today, Megan Henderson, who is the behavioral health clinical practice leader at Mariner Hospital. Megan became an APCSW in Wisconsin in 2008. She then moved to Texas that same year and became an LMSW. After a year for fellowship, she moved to Minnesota and became an LGSW, ultimately taking the clinical licensure exam and becoming an LICSW in Minnesota. She then moved this license back to Texas. I can't even believe what I'm reading here. Back to Texas as an LCSW, and then ultimately back to Wisconsin as an LCSW in 2014. So she knows a bit about licensure and applying for endorsement when moving from state to state. And there's other fun things to know about Megan that she might share with you in this talk, but let's give her a warm welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for that introduction. So yes, everything Angela said was true. I'll tell you all about it in a little while. These are some other things about me. I'm a lecturer here at the school, and so I teach psychopathology 712, so the advanced psychopathology, as well as the supervision course, consultation, supervision, and social. 842. So I've been teaching since 2015 here, so some of you have been in my classes. That's lovely. And I often volunteer for things, maybe too often, but I've been telling Angela for like 2 years, like, we should do a lunch and learn on this, because I get a ton of questions about it, and I like talking about it. If you saw the flyer, you saw my professional photo, which Angela asked for. I used this photo for everything for a while, and to make my work like paid for a professional photo, because I was like, I'm just going to keep going to conferences and use this photo until you pay for one, but I still just like this picture better, so I thought I'd share everything. So again, I may be qualified to talk about this thing because of all these licenses and my journey in transferring them. Interesting, my only issue in all of this was coming back to Wisconsin in 2014. They did not accept my application for endorsement. Kind of a mess, so I will tell you about that later. There's a way to figure it out. Don't worry, I'm licensed. So social work licensing, it is a bunch of red tape and it's necessary. I think if we think about the history of social work, initially it was definitely kind of a peer-led, sort of novice profession. And over the years, the effort to make it into a more professionalized, more academic profession has then required subsequent licensing and certification to kind of match that. Which I think is great. You don't want to pay a lot of money for an education, work really hard for an education, and then sort of have it just be a lay job, right? You want it to be a profession. So again, a lot of red tape with licensing, however, quite necessary. There's like 2 chairs right in front here, and it's exciting. Okay, so the history of social work licensing. Got to do a little bit of Googling for some of this. So first social work class was offered in 1898. In 1919, we had the first organization of social work schools. And in 1952, the Council on Social Work Education formed. So, most of the social work schools, hopefully all of them, but certainly this one is accredited through the CSWE. To apply for a license, you have to have gone to an accredited school. Right now, there's like 637 programs that are at that level and accredited. California was the first state to start to register social workers in 1945. So the field of licensing and credentialing and certifying is still pretty new. In 1979, the Association of Social Work Boards was formed, and that's who does the national license, national exam. And the first licensing exams were not until 1983. So again, still pretty new. Wisconsin was actually one of the last states to formalize their licensing process. So again, it's kind of interesting. A lot of states have certifications, and Wisconsin still actually has a lot of certifications. The only license is actually the LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker. The rest of them are certifications. Equally good, but a lot of other states do have licenses where they're lower or lower level degrees. Okay, so social work licensing, you know, there is a national exam, there's a national board. You only have to take the national exam once if you pass it. If you don't, you have to take it again until you pass it. But you'll never have to take that again when you move to a different state. That exam qualifies you at that level in any state. But the laws that govern social workers really vary from state to state. And each state gets to decide what they think an LCSW or an APCSW, whatever that level should be and should have. How much experience they should have, how much experience the person supervising them should have, and that can really vary from state to state. There's a lot of similarities, but there are definitely some key differences that make sort of, if there's a thought I might move, make it really tricky. But first we're gonna start in the state of Wisconsin, kind of talking a little bit about how you get licensed here, and then sort of what you need to keep track of, right? So the ASWB, the Association of Socialist Boards, identifies 4 levels that states can choose from in terms of the exam. So there's the basic exam that you would take after you got your bachelor's degree, if for some reason you needed to be certified or have a certification at that level. Some employers would require that. That is just a CSW, a certified social worker. There's the intermediate exam, also called the master's exam, which is what you'll take if you're going into the mental health world after you graduate. This is, you graduated from a master's program and don't have any clinical social work experience, and it allows you to practice clinical social work with supervision. Then there's the advanced examination. This is not a clinical exam. So this is if you have your master's but are still doing a different type of social work that is not clinical. But it's a little bit similar to the intermediate exam. And then there's the clinical exam, which is having your master's and 2 to 3 years of clinical experience with supervision. That will get you the LCSW in most states. So those are the 4 levels that the National Association kind of set out, right? And then each state picks sort of which certifications and which licenses are we going to have for our state, and then matches them to one of these national exams. So in the state of Wisconsin, unless you have an LCSW, you technically only have a certification. That's okay. And there are 3 types of certifications in Wisconsin. So like I said, there's a CSW, so that's if you have your bachelor's degree, and again, that's the basic level social work exam. There's the advanced practice social worker, which some people refer to as the APCSW, and some people refer to as the CAPSW. The C just means certified. So it's advanced practice social worker and certified advanced practice social worker. I've always said like CAPSA, it was like how we always like abbreviated it, you know, because it sounds cool. But lately I've heard people only say APSW. So I don't know, it's all the same thing. Just if you're putting that certified or not in there. And then there's the independent social worker. So again, this is not a clinical licensing. Is there anyone in here who thinks that they will not be going any kind of clinical route? I figured, that makes it easy. I'll stop talking about these things. This is actually an easier license to kind of endorse. Non-clinical licenses are easier to endorse from state to state. Okay, so the certified advanced practice social worker. In the state of Wisconsin. How you get this is through an application and of course a fee. You have to verify your education and your degree. You take a Wisconsin statute and rules examination. That of course has a fee, but it's open book. Some people do it in a group, that's okay. I furiously texted people when I realized I had to take it when I had to come back here, I had to take the state exam. The state exam was a little outdated. Who's taken it? Has anyone taken it yet? It's like a little outdated, and there's some terms I was like, what does this term mean? I don't know. I'm from Texas, I don't know what's going on. And then then you have the documentation of your supervised clinical field placement. So this is an interesting piece. At the end of your field work this year, if you're graduating, so at the end of your 2nd year, if you're graduating, you'll have your field faculty will sign this form saying, yep, you did this clinical clinical field placement, you accrued these hours, here's how you were supervised, and sign it. You don't actually have to turn this in to get advanced practice license, or sorry, advanced practice certification, but you can, and then they have it, and it's kind of ready to go for when you get your LCSW. It is required for your LCSW, so keep it, don't lose it. Like that was like my saving grace when I moved back here, as I had my form from 2007 that a professor who no longer works here had signed, and I was like, I don't ever need this, I'm moving to Texas. I went to this school. I'm moving to Texas. Luckily, I am a pack rat and was still in my belongings 15 years later and found it and saved my life. But so we'll talk a little bit more about this. I printed out some copies, but it's on the website. It is easiest to just submit it with your application for your CAPSW. Because then they have it on file. But you know how boards are. They might lose it. Keep it in your documents.
We also keep it in the student file.
Look at that. Look at that. Smart. If you've been licensed somewhere else, you need to kind of have a letter from that board. There's the convictions and malpractice claims. And then, making sure all your names are right on the credentials. Those are some of those steps. And then, so you apply, and then they tell you if you can take the exam or not. So you do the application, here's all my things, here's some money, and then they get back to you and say, okay, you can take the test. So they'll approve your examinations, give you instructions on how to schedule it, do all those fun things. You can take practice tests online for a fee. They do have like a little booklet that gives you some practice questions. I think, like I told a lot of my students, the hardest thing about these exams is just kind of learning the phrasing of the questions, because they're phrased kind of funny, and there's a lot of like, what would you do first? What's the most important thing to consider? And I'm kind of like, they're all important. It depends on what setting it's in. Don't read any more into the question. But again, there are study guides. And once you pass this, then you've passed the national exam. Wisconsin does require a 70 to pass, but that's fairly consistent across states. I couldn't find a higher number in others. I couldn't find documentation of a higher number in a lot of the states I looked at. So I think that is pretty standard passing score. If you don't pass it, you have to wait 90 days until you can take it again. So once you've taken and passed the national exam, that is stored with that organization. The ASWB keeps it. If you ever want to transfer that score to a different state, you just have to pay a fee, of course, and they'll transfer it for you. So once you've passed that, you're good. So questions about the CAPSW in the state of Wisconsin? Or thoughts? Okay, understanding that. Okay. So after you get your CAPSW, you start your 3,000 hours of clinical social work experience. I'm told that there was a change in that there used to be a minimum of 2 years, and now it's different, that you can get it in a year and a half, or as soon as you can. So it used to be 3,000 hours and a minimum of 2 years. That minimum is still exists in some other states, but in Wisconsin it has changed. So kind of as fast as you can, getting your clinical social work supervision, you then submit another application along with your field supervision paper, the form 2672, unless they already have it on file. They might have lost it, so submit it again. And then the board again determines when you can sit for the national clinical exam, and then you sit for the national clinical exam, and everything is happy, and then you're an LCSW. So let's say you have an LCSW, and you're thinking about moving to a different state. So there is no real license reciprocity between any state. There are systems in place for, you can transfer your scores from an ASWB exam, and there is typically a process of of endorsement, of a state endorsing you. So the state of Wisconsin saying like, yeah, Minnesota, here's our social worker, she's pretty great, she's got nothing on her record, she has this license, here you go. And you have to pay a fee to the state of Wisconsin for them to give you some good graces. Just kidding, no to bribe them. Which reminds me, when I was moving my license once from the state of Minnesota to the state of Texas, so as that license switched, the state of Minnesota was shutting down because it was like one of the budget bank, I don't know, like whatever it's called, right? What was someone said? Furlough, thank you. It was in the middle of a state furlough. And so it was like literally the last day before the state shut down, and I was like in there with my verification form, like, can you please send this? Like, well, if we get to it today, it'll go, but otherwise it'll be some months. And I was like, no, I'm trying to get out of this state, like, fill it out. And they're like, we'll see. And I was like, just write a check for $30. And I was like, if I write it for $60, would it go today? And they said, no, but we'll give you some more ethic credits you need to take. Okay, I won't try to bribe the state of Minnesota again. Luckily they got it in and everything was fine. So again, there is typically a process of endorsement or verification, but some states have a bit more difficult process with this. So some people in the field might tell you that you should complete all of your like clinical supervised hours in one place, right? So like after you get your CAPSW, stick in one state, accrue those 3,000 hours, because then it's going to be, it's going to be easier to transfer your license. Sometimes that's true, because anytime you move a state or you're switching jobs within a month, if there's a break in your supervision, you can lose all the hours for that month. And you'll kind of read those guidelines a bit more, but some states have really strict guidelines. Wisconsin's are a little bit more lax, but they want you to have 4 hours of supervision, no more than 1 hour per week, or no less than 1 hour per week. And if at any point in that month there's an interruption, technically you may have lost the hours for that week or even the hours for that month. So anytime you're switching supervisors or moving states, there is the risk of like losing some time with that. I actually think I've learned a bit more about LCSW endorsement, through the years and just kind of reading a little bit before this training. So I think there's ways to do it. I don't think it's yay or nay either way. And I did transfer or get my in-training certification license twice, endorsed through different states. Like I said, I had an APCSW here. They endorsed me to Texas, or they don't have the same, it's like an LMSW, and that LMSW endorsed me to Minnesota. So I transferred that that certification license twice. So there's ways to do it, don't worry. You'll figure it out, is what I said. I'll help you figure it out, but you'll figure it out. There's not a right way or wrong way to do it. The most important thing is to keep really good records. And so keeping a log of your clinical experience and hours is really important. Some states want you to have more detailed information, what you were doing and how you accumulated those hours. So I would say even if you have a thought that you're gonna stay in Wisconsin, during your supervised clinical hours, during those 3,000 hours, I would keep pretty good records of it. I would log, keep track of your clinical supervisor's name, their license number, the date of their license, and their up-to-date contact information, but then also, the start of the week, how many individual hours of supervision you had that week, if there was group supervision, and being very clear about that. It's going to help you in case at any point you have a thought that you might be trying to get licensed in a different state and they don't accept you through endorsement. You'll need to resubmit all of that information. So really good idea just now, keep a record. If you never use it, great. If you need it, it's going to be right there. Before you move or before you're thinking about moving, contact that licensing board in that state and sort of start that process. You'll typically be looking for any information that says application by endorsement or application by out-of-state licensee. And be prepared to call, and it might be a lot. So when I was moving to Wisconsin, I basically called every day for a while. Finally, when I got here and I still hadn't heard, I just went to DSPS and sat for a day. I was like, met some strange people, and it was great. I ended up buying flowers for my person at the end of it all. I like petitioned the board to do a review early. I mean, I was gonna like lose my job that I moved here for because they wouldn't approve this license. So I had a lot riding on it. It's possible. So most states have some type of state laws or jurisprudence exam that you can do. Almost all of them are open book. And then start requesting documents. So you'll need official graduate school transcripts. You'll need your ASWB test scores to be transferred, and then any of these license verification forms from your current state. So your current state board will fill out a license verification saying, yep, this person is licensed, they're in good standing, all is good to go. Contacting your old supervisor, you'll probably need a signature from your previous supervisor to testify to your clinical experience and supervised hours. So when this happened with me, my person had unfortunately died. And so I had to go through the process of my previous supervisor was deceased. What do I do now? I have this form that she filled out 6 years ago. So that was exciting. Again, it can still be done. It just takes a little bit more time. My other supervisor had like retired and was out on like a farm and like didn't have the internet. And so I had to have like a friend drive from Minneapolis like an hour out with this form. Like, can you sign this form for Megan Anderson? Great, it's good. So again, it can be done. Just gonna have to have some friends. But if you have all these things signed already, it's gonna be much easier for you. So again, a couple key points about a license endorsement and verification. I looked into a few state statutes and to kind of give some comparables. And this kind of came about when one of your peers was asking about the state of New York, and that turns out to be a really tricky state. But state of Minnesota, it's really similar, except they require 4,000 hours of supervised practice, so it's higher. So again, if you only had 3,000 hours to get your LCSW, they might want you to have another 1,000 hours once you're in the state with someone who's supervised. They might issue a temporary license, and then say you need to, you still need to work with another LCSW to get the other 1,000 hours. Otherwise, it's pretty similar. Because they have a license that's higher than most states, it's an LICSW. So it's a licensed independent clinical social worker that I don't think exists in any other state. So I don't know why they did that. They don't have an LCSW, it's just an LICSW. But it does require more hours. The state of New York, so again, there's no real reciprocity, again, or like endorsement or transfer. There is a reciprocity for LCSWs if you've been certified in another state but have completed at least 10 years of practice within 15 years. So your peer who's looking at New York has contacted them, and there is a little bit of a different way around it if you are not trying to apply for reciprocity, but trying to apply as if you've never been licensed in that state, right? And so kind of applying from scratch with all this information. But they require 6,000 hours of supervised practice with someone who has 6,000 hours of social work experience, of clinical social work experience. So a lot of supervisors who've had more than 4 years of experience might not still be supervising. Oftentimes supervision gets passed down to people who are younger and have more energy. So I think it's possible, but it's something to kind of be curious about if there's a thought of, I want to move there someday. Well, maybe I need to think about my supervision being with someone who has more years of supervising practice or clinical work. So something to think about. California, basically they're saying if you have an LCSW in another state and have had that for 4 years, immediately preceding your California application, you kind of can apply through endorsement. So basically, once you're an LCSW and have done that for 4 years, then you can apply. So they're not quite as tricky as New York, but still higher requirement. Texas, basically they're like, cool, come on down. Come help us out, we're a big state. No, I mean, like, I think again, like it It's a rigorous state, but basically if you have your LCSW and you have been working in another state, you can apply, fill out the form and have your state endorse you to us. Washington State, pretty similar, but again, they require 4,000 hours of supervised experience. So again, I picked a few states. Sorry if I didn't pick your state that you were thinking about maybe moving to. I mean, the best part of all this is like you don't have to know. Like you might find out in 7 years that you moved to Indiana. There's a way to do it. There's always going to be a way to do it, but it's going to go much smoother if you have really great records, right? And so a few things to keep in your records, like I've already said, keeping this form 2672. I did print out some copies, but it's on the internet, so like you don't need my copy, but just so you can kind of see what it looks like. So again, if you're in the state of Wisconsin, you can submit this with your APCSW application, but you don't have to actually, you don't need this form until you're applying for your LCSW, but then they'll have it in your file. And don't lose it. I guess now you can always call Angela and she'll find it for you, because you keep a record of it. For how many years do you keep them?
I don't know how many, but we complete them at the end of the year.
Yeah.
The mental health field faculty do, and then they go in with like the student's learning plan and hours log. This is another document that goes in.
Yeah. Okay.
They keep them forever, maybe.
I don't know. I was saying, like, why did I think of that? I just
I think
just
we're
had it.
required to keep educational records if it counts as that for like 7 years.
7 years. Yeah.
So I don't think we can guarantee beyond that, but
Yeah.
we still have it.
That sounds better than forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to promise forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a helpful form to keep track of. Again, this supervision log, again, many states have specific requirements, and so keeping a very detailed log of this is going to be really, really helpful. Keep your syllabus from psychopathology. Again, you can always contact the school to get it, but you're going to need to submit that for an LCSW. You're required to have taken psychopathology in grad school, so it's easier for you if you just keep it. If you were just in my class and you need it, you can email me and I'll send it to you. But definitely keep it in your records. And then again, when you apply for your LCSW, your supervisor will complete this form. Keep a record of that too, right? If you move to a different state, you might have to complete basically the same information using their form, but at least you have like a signed form, in your records, very clear information. Try to keep your supervisor's contact information as well, that's helpful. I think if you're learning all this and you're really frustrated, that there has to be an easier way, what on earth? There are certainly organizations and groups saying like, this is a license that needs to be a bit more equal across states, and we need to be able to have practice mobility. So here's a website of a group that's really looking at social work practice mobility. You have folks who live on state lines and maybe practicing in 2 states. You can hold a license in 2 states, but it's going to be twice as much money to keep up that license. And if you live, and if you want to be able to be working in 3 states at once, really thinking about that, especially with like telepsychiatry, things like that. Again, I have a thought that there could be an easier way to be doing some of this, but all I know is the arcane way that it is right now. So that's a little bit of what I have learned. I will tell you the brief story of when I learned the most about this, which is when I was coming back from Texas. I had moved my license so many times that I was very used to it and thought it would be no thing. I'd fill out the form for endorsement and move through this. And I had submitted all the paperwork to the State Board of Wisconsin and kind of was just waiting for a response and wasn't hearing, was leaving messages. And then finally, after like 3 months, they said, we're rejecting your application to endorsement. It seems like the criteria for endorsement or for LCSWs in Texas is different than Wisconsin. So I went through this whole rebuttal and appeal process of outlining the criteria. I could not find a specific difference, but they wouldn't budge. And I said, sorry, we can't accept it. And I said, doesn't it matter that I went to school there? I'm an alumni. I'm trying to come back to your state. And they said, no, we don't need you. You gave us up for Texas. And so I had to apply as if I had never had an LCSW before. So I had to kind of, despite having it for 8 years, and so I had to kind of go back through all those forms, have my field work, not like recertified, not meaning I had to do it all over again, but had to get all those forms filled out again. So I was able to do it. It was certainly more money, a lot more time and hassle. Like I said, one of my supervisors had unfortunately passed away. The other one was MIA a little bit on a farm in the middle of nowhere. But it was all possible, right? So it took me a little bit longer, certainly more money, but definitely possible. And that was my hardest experience. The rest of them, like I thought this process was so easy because it went off seemingly very well. So that's what I know. I'm curious what questions are out there. I kind of inundated you with a lot of information. Some of it is maybe applicable, some of it is like, I don't know where I'm gonna be. But what questions might you have? Yes, Liz.
Just one thing to add, last year a student, and I came in late, so maybe you said this, that there's reduced application fees.
Great, yep.
Okay, did you?
I didn't say that, but that's true.
Okay, so, Kaylin and I actually met today, Form 32 something.
Mm-hmm.
But it allows you to, when you're submitting your application, if you fit the criterion, to only pay 10%, which is the difference of like $160 to $17. So, what is 32? What is it?
3217.
3217. So, that's a form worth filling out too.
Absolutely.
Thank you to that student.
Probably. Did your job reimburse you for application
No.
fees, or is that something-
Usually they can't.
Okay.
Sometimes a job will pay for your application fee if you're like getting your LCSW, and that means they're gonna be able to bill insurance more. If like you getting your LCSW is kind of better for them. Sometimes they'll pay for that application fee, but otherwise jobs aren't allowed. Usually most, because it's a health profession, aren't allowed to pay for reimbursement of the transfer of license. Yeah. They paid a moving fee though. So. Other questions? Yeah.
Where did you get that information about each state?
I just did a lot of Googling, so I went to the state board website. So I started when up here it asked me about New York, and then I was like, what are other popular states? Everyone wants to go Seattle and California. So I looked at those.
Colorado's the
Colorado, okay, I should have looked at that one. So I just went to their state board website. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in school social work. I was just wondering like what you know about moving for that, if there's anything
Yeah,
different.
so it depends what license you have. If you're an LCSW and gonna be doing school social work, it's gonna be the same process. If you're not gonna have an LCSW, that is usually a certification in a lot of different states, and those are easier to apply for endorsement through. Otherwise, it's a pretty similar process. But since it's often not a license, it's a little bit easier to transfer because there's not as much like legality with it or kind of riding on it. So I would look at if you're thinking about different states, what are school social workers required to have? Are they required to have an AP, CSW, or the equivalent? Are they just required to be certified? And then look into what do I need to apply for endorsement? Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? No silly questions here. Yeah, Angela.
In your research, did you look, when you were dabbling in the other states, at the educational requirements and see many differences?
Yeah, not really. So if your school is now I have all the acronyms in my head. Accredited school. Most of the education requirements are going to be the same if you're going to an accredited school. So I didn't see a ton of that. And social work's pretty good at that. Their accreditation is pretty tight. I think with like masters in psychology can be really different. So if you're trying to be an LPC, the accreditation standards for masters in psychology programs are not as sort of aligned and tight. So I've seen more issues with people trying to transfer LPCs across states because then they're often required to take more credits. So it's like, oh, actually, to have an LPC in this state, your accredited school needed to have you take these extra classes. There are a few states that say like, oh, you needed to have a specific class in abuse, or mandatory reporting, and if you can't, psychofarm, I have not seen that. And if you can't prove that one of your syllabi covered that, then you might have to take a class. So it's a good question. I think it's not so much credits as it is subject matter, and sometimes there's ways to prove that you've had that training.
Like in Minnesota, they do clock hours, and they require a lot more clock hours related to psychopathology than
Right.
Wisconsin. So
Right.
students kind of need both 612 and 712 to meet those clock hours for Minnesota.
Yeah. So I think like the good part of all of this is if you're like, I'm just staying in Wisconsin forever, and then like in 2 weeks you're like, oh shoot, actually going to Massachusetts. Like there's gonna be a way to figure it out, right? So you're gonna be able to take an extra class, get some extra hours. Like you're not gonna be stranded and not be able to use your license in a different state. It just might be a little bit more of a hiccup or some extra legwork. Yeah. So this is what I know about this topic. I think it's helpful to kind of review it. I certainly didn't learn about any of this when I was in school, because I think we didn't know about it a ton. There weren't as many people jumping all over states. If you have questions that you think of after this, you can certainly email me. That's my school address and my work address. I don't teach until the end of March, so I'm teaching in the part-time program. So if you email me in the next like 2 weeks, I'm a little faster if you apply to work. But I still check my school email, don't worry, Angela. The state board is gonna know more than me, so like if you have a question about a specific state, they're gonna know more. But I might be faster in applying and at least be able to give you a little bit of info or guide you a little bit. So certainly don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to try to be helpful. But again, I only know what I know, but I'll help you figure out the answer. So that's what I have. Any other thoughts or questions? You guys are, I don't know where I'm gonna live. Okay, well we'll stop then. Thanks for hanging out.